Hello artists, today I want to show you some watercolor special effects. Most people have used watercolor paints before, but these are some tips and tricks to make your watercolor paintings extra special. Here I have some watercolor paper, which is a little bit thicker than regular painting paper, and it also has a little bit of a texture to it. The first special effect I'm going to show you is called a watercolor resist, or a crayon resist in this case. You can draw with any color of crayon you want on dry paper. To wake up our watercolor paints, what I like to do is take a little drop of water and place it in each of the pans of watercolors that I think I'm going to use. I don't want it to be too much water, but I want it to be enough that it begins to wake up the watercolors. Wake up, watercolors, I want to use you. Then I use my paintbrush to very gently swirl it around in the watercolor pan and wake up the watercolor paint. For a resist, I'm going to paint wet watercolors on top of my crayons, and it's going to reveal the drawing underneath. It's called a resist because the crayon's wax keeps the paint from sticking to the paper. So as you can see, the white of my paper is turning the beautiful blue color of the watercolor paint I chose, but the crayons are resisting the paint, and it kind of sits on top of it to create this beautiful effect. Here are a couple other examples of resists I've done using crayons. You can do pictures, patterns, anything you like. The next watercolor special effects I'm going to show you is called wet on wet. Apply clean water to your paper. Here I'm just using my paintbrush to brush the water on. You can't even see that I'm doing it, but I'm brushing the water evenly over the top of my paper. Before the water dries, load up your brush with paint and touch it to the water. The color will spread out quickly and blend down the paper in a really natural and beautiful way. Sometimes if you tilt your paper, you can even watch it drip a little bit as it blends. If you want to blend your colors together, you can get a bit of water onto your brush and then you overlap the two colors. So I pretty much just brush some light water over the blue and over the violet, and then I'm letting gravity actually pull the paint down so that they blend in a very natural and beautiful way. The next watercolor special effects I'm going to show you is called a wash. It's actually called a gradated wash, but for now we can just call it wash. To do a wash, I wake up my paint so much that I get a really bright version of the color. Start by painting a stripe across your watercolor paper. You're going to continue painting across, and each time you paint a stripe, put your brush halfway into the one that you already finished. Now I want to begin blending my color down so that it fades away. So I get a little bit of water on my brush, and I place my brush halfway into my last paint stroke, and I paint across the stripe. Each time I do this, the color gets lighter. It's part of the magic of watercolor paints. Water is what makes the paints move, and it's also what makes them blend into a beautiful wash, as you see here. The next watercolor special effect will look like a bit of a review at first. Can you remember the name of this technique where I start by brushing water onto the paper? If you thought wet on wet, then you are correct. As you can see, when I use wet onto wet paper, I get this beautiful and natural blending because the color of my watercolor moves freely on the wet paper. Now here comes the really magic part of this special effect. Salt! Who would have thought that salt could make your watercolor paintings look so amazing? Take just a few grains of salt in your hand and you're going to sprinkle them onto your wet paint. You'll know that your paint is wet if it's still shiny looking. Now this special effect takes a little bit of patience and you won't see the results right away. You actually have to wait until it dries. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on the drying rack and show you what it looks like once all of the water is dried. Wow, just look at that special effect. The salt has pulled the color out of the paint, creating a beautiful texture. What does it remind you of? The last watercolor special effects uses watercolor pencils. These are located on the bottom shelf of the paint center. They look like regular colored pencils and I need your help keeping them separated from the regular colored pencils. Here's how we know the difference. Do you see that tiny paintbrush? That means that it's a watercolor pencil, or that water and a paintbrush will wake these up in the most beautiful way. Use them just like regular colored pencils. Draw pictures, use that excellent craftsmanship when you're coloring in. Try blending colors together and overlapping. This is how you make a regular colored pencil drawing look amazing, and it's also how you make a watercolor pencil drawing or painting look amazing.
Colors together just to see what's going on.
If I'm going to fill in a larger area of my paper, I like to use my pencil kind of on its sides, and once again I always overlap my colors so I can't tell where one ends and the other begins, unless of course I'm coloring in a specific picture. Once you've finished coloring, it's time to wake up the watercolor pencils with a damp paintbrush. As you can see, my brush isn't soaking wet and I'm using it in careful brush strokes to blend these colors together. The fun thing about watercolor paints is I can paint one layer, let it dry, and then draw on top of them with more watercolor pencils or regular colored pencils. So pretty. Finally, I want to talk to you about a couple challenges with watercolor paints. A common challenge is if you make something that you're painting a little bit too dark and you wish that it was a lighter version of that color. What I can do is use a paintbrush to get that part of the painting just a little bit wet and very, very gently scrub the paper and scrub the paint off of that part of my paper. You can also use a paper towel to dab off the color. Can you see how it got lighter and now it has a nice highlight? Another common challenge with watercolor paints is getting your paper too wet. Oops, way too much. Hey, guess what? You can use a paper towel to blot off the extra water. I blot and then fold my towel up so that it's not making a big mess while I do it. In fact, using a paper towel is a really neat way to create texture. Hey, that's one more special effects. Awesome! Now, the really fun thing about watercolor painting is you don't have to choose one technique. You can try all these different special effects in a way that makes sense for your art project. What special effects do you see me using in this piece of art? Okay, artists, I can't wait to see how you use these special effects to make unique pieces of art all your own. Please make sure you take care of the supplies, clean your brushes, and keep the paint center in good shape. Have fun creating! Bye!